Do you or someone you know struggle with depression? Even if you don't, or know someone who doesn't, or you don't know anyone who does, maybe you have questions about it. It's one of the most prevalent diagnoses or misdiagnoses worldwide that affects so many people. So even if it doesn't affect you or someone that you know, you may have questions. And that's what we're getting into tonight. We're talking all things depression, from the science to the clinical attributes to current events going on around the world that all stem back to major depression. So if you have questions, you want to join the discussion, go ahead, put your questions in the chat. We'll be right back. We're getting to all of it tonight. And we're live. All right. Norty, we're back for another week of the Rad and Norty Show. This week we're talking about depression. But before we get into this more somber, I guess, depressive topic, okay? How's life? What's going on? What's new?
Not much, man. Just busy. I can't remember if we discussed this last time, but the girlfriend and I took in a cat.
So, no.
Okay.
You have a cat?
So we now have a cat. So getting adjusted to that.
A headline, like I got in my inbox that growing up with a cat as a correlation, I don't think it's like a direct association with psychosis in men. The association doesn't quite exist in females, but I think the male population. So you're just preparing to go insane? Is that what I hear?
Listen, I'm not a cat person at all. Never have been. Don't necessarily like cats, but this guy found his way into our life. Girlfriend found him on the streets. He followed her to her job as a nanny, and that family couldn't keep him. We ended up with him.
Cat.
And now my room is a jungle because apparently cats can't eat plants. So
Bishop, this is where these came. Nice to see you this week. Anybody else joining us out there, whether you're on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, go ahead, give us a wave, a thumbs up. If you're new to the show, introduce yourself. Please engage throughout. This is a 3-person conversation. Me, Dr. Rad, Nada, Dr. Norty, and of course the chat. We like keeping it live. So
I guess that's my way. That's my way of starting it less somber.
Street cat. John, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure to see my brothers in the chat.
Yeah, so that's been an adjustment. We'll start the somber topic because we're definitely going to get into that. And I feel like the last few, maybe we started off on a more serious note than normal. But yeah, life's good, man. Busy.
Good. And you're a little quiet on my end. I'm not sure. Is that me, chat? Is he quiet? It might be me. I'll crank it up. Sound quiet to you, chat? Give us a thumbs up or thumbs down. Thumbs down if he sounds quiet to all of you.
I'll crank it up. I'll get closer to my mic, and we'll see. If I'm too loud now,
on my end, but it could just be that my computer volume's a little lower than normal. So
life's been good. I've been busy, and that's why, like, when things get busy, other stresses are happening. I'm happy to be on the show. I'm happy to be talking about stuff with you. Happy to have the chat. And it feels good, man. Happy to be here.
Same. I've had a wonderful week. Getting my face dirty, being out in the yard, getting the grass groomed. It's been good. We got our honest Lord. Welcome to the show, all the way from Tanzania. Spine surgeon. Wow, fantastic. Thank you for joining us. It's great to see you. My name is Dr. Rad. This is my co-host, not a doctor, Josh Norty. We talk about all topics, brain and spine. We usually keep it fun, light, a little less academic, although we do discuss research articles here and there. But really for anyone joining, whether you don't have to be a professional. If you have questions about the brain or spine, we're here to talk about it, make it interesting. And we always sort of center around a topic, even though we very often get off topic, but that's okay. It's all about having fun. Tonight we're talking about depression. So some interesting research. Oh, I guess let's start with some research headlines. Interesting research, some research articles I reviewed this week about depression is So there's some interesting work being done looking at the gut microbiome. So like all the little bacteria and stuff that, exist in your gut and the associations with major depressive disorder. I thought that was really interesting. And actually not surprising. And I think it kind of speaks to this larger topic, which I personally can't really claim to know much of anything about other than just the general gist, but just the mind or brain gut connection. Very fascinating stuff. Very, very fascinating stuff.
That is interesting because I would have never guessed that the two were linked up or could possibly have a connection that would affect one another, especially when it comes to depression. So I'd be inclined to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I don't know too much. Sorry, I'm just answering some of the. Obviously we get tons of friends and family joining the show, and they always like to text me right when it's starting to find out the latest insight. And apparently, we got textbooks falling down in the back.
We're already off to a banger start.
We got great start.
We got
tonight.
street cats. We got
falling down.
We got ghosts in the rad house knocking over textbooks.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna fix that before my textbook breaks something else. Be right back. But Josh, tell me what it is about the mind or brain gut connection that seems fascinating to you, and then I'll kind of tell you what I know about it.
So what's fascinating about a brain and gut connection to me personally, and chat, share your thoughts on this. I have always been under the impression that your attitude, your mentality, it's all connected to your body health in general, right? So if you put in work, you eat right, and get some exercise in, your body's going to feel better overall. And I think that can definitely contribute to things like depression, anxiety, and that's always been something that helps me at least be in a better mood is being active and taking care of my body. So I would love to know how, from the science aspect, your gut health can affect things like your mood. And I don't know if you're back yet, but I'm going to keep rambling.
I am back. Thank you for filling in that gap. I think we've hopefully fixed the problem. I cannot promise we will not have another crash of textbooks. But yeah, I mean, actually, surprisingly, the brain has an astronomically high number of neural connections to the gut. It's called the enteric nervous system. Let's see. What does Bishop have to say before I ramble on? He says, I wonder how that works when you do things like OMAD or intermittent fasting. That's a great question. I don't really have an answer for you. Like I said, this is not something I'm like well versed in, but
and things like that, so I do some intermittent fasting. I don't contribute to the one meal a day, but I do a 16-hour stretch where I don't eat before I have my first meal. So basically I'll eat dinner or have a late snack, and then I won't eat again until lunch. So I had read and watched a video on how that can contribute to like your body processing things better. And from what I've heard, and I don't think many of these people were doctors, but they were fitness people.
fitness
some of them with a
real
background
big on it.
Some type of background in a little bit of nutrition, but none of them were scientists or specialists. But this guy had worked out his own version of it. It's like kickstarting your body. And, I felt, but I'm always, so I'll take it back even a step further. So I've always found a peace in working out, and what that led me to was refining my diet, which was a harder thing to do. And I'm by no means the perfect diet person, but I've trial and errored many different things, and I found out what works for me and how my body reacts to different things. And when you do that, you can really key in on what things are having an effect on your body and your mindset as a whole if you're paying attention. So that's been my experience with it, but I don't know the science to it.
Perspective. Yeah. I don't think that's like a unique experience. Yeah. I think I've had the same experience. Mm-hmm. But then, like, what sort of things for you are you like, let's focus more on like the mental picture, right? What things make you feel like you're kind of, because yes, there's clinically diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder, right? But we can all attest to being somewhere on that spectrum of experiencing emotions of depression.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't fall into the category of a diagnostic disorder.
Right.
So what types of foods do you find like affect your mind in a way where you feel yourself maybe more on that depressed end of the spectrum?
So if I eat heavier, and I can walk you through the way that it affects me. So if I eat heavier, if I'm eating a lot of breads and sugars and even a ton of dairy, I just feel heavier. It's almost like a cloud is weighing over me. And for me personally,
You'd make a terrible Italian, my
yeah,
friend.
and I know what I've learned what it stems from, and I can get into a little bit more about um my family's history with depression, and I've alluded to some of the mental health things that have gone on in my family, but I think this is a good episode to get into that. But I do not feel comfortable in my own body. I was a heavier kid, and when I don't
Hmm,
feel good about what I'm doing, what I'm putting into myself, that's when the depression starts to hit me a little bit, and
interesting.
I'm cognizant of it, right? So
Mhm.
I can do things that are within my control to help that. And when I do things to better myself, I feel better, and I feel like that affects my mood and it helps me keep more even keel. I wouldn't say I suffer from like a clinical depression. So that's my self-diagnosis, whether that's healthy or not. That's just what I've observed for my
Well,
own
I mean, at the end of
actions
the
and
day,
food. Yeah.
I think doctors, we love to parse things up and put things in categories and make simple things more complicated than they need to be in this like endless pursuit to understand the science of everything. But the reality is, some things are as simple as you just know. And you can't
And
explain why you know, but you do just know.
and we talked about this last week. Like everybody, things affect people differently, even when it's a drug, and especially when it comes to the brain. You just don't know. And if you're that's why I try to pay attention to myself. I try all the things. I know when I'm a little off. I even noticed over the pandemic, and we talked about this a little bit. I was having a drink or two like every night or every couple nights, and eventually it was lingering over into days. Like I wasn't drinking heavily, but it was just majorly affecting my mood. So I cut it out to the point where like I won't drink very often. And it was just you pay
Yeah.
attention, you start to thankfully I'm cognizant of it, and I'll get into my family history with this, and that's what made me pay a little bit more attention to things like this. So on my mom's side, my aunt suffered from depression to the point where she tried to take her life several times until she was successful. And those are the type of things that make you think and be cognizant, because I don't think that's isolated just to one person in a family. I think that's the type of thing that can linger down a family tree. And it made me think twice about a lot of stuff and just really pay close attention, because that's not the only thing on my mom's side of the family. That there's some mental health stuff over there. So that's what made me really pay attention to me and how my brain works.
Mm. And I think the things you've landed on, right?
Mhm.
Diet and exercise
Mhm.
for you are big components of things that keep you out of more, I guess, elevated away from the depressed end of the spectrum of emotions. And it's like, as doctors, like we say, yes, we have clinical data that supports that that's true. But it's like, why do we need clinical data to tell us that, right? Even if it was only true for you and not true in the population of people. Why does it matter if it works, right? You're not doing heroin and you're like, doc, it's curing my depression. And you're like, yeah, but you're killing yourself. That's different.
Yeah, and I think what Jonathan threw in the chat here. I think having the discipline to follow a diet could boost morale and battle depression. It's definitely that's what it is. It's a
That's
control, and
true.
it's a discipline, and that is the part that I think helps me control those type of things a little bit more and makes me feel good. And listen, when I'm craving some bad food, I listen to that too and really keying
Mhm.
into to your body, and it'll tell you what you need, in my opinion.
And
Um,
then Bishop's question, I'll
mhm.
just try to leave the questions up on the
Yeah.
screen, not quite as long, just because at the request of our editors, it does make it more challenging for
Sorry,
them.
Carlos.
Yeah, Carlos's life gets a little more challenging when he's trying to make videos after the stream when we've got questions over our faces. Also, Josh, you need to sit up in your frame more too. I think would help, or maybe bring your camera
bring
down.
the camera
That'd
down.
probably help too.
Yeah,
now the questions would
that's
be more
better.
across your chest instead of in front of your face. There we go. But what were we talking about?
The discipline,
right? It's like that. That even the idea of like having the discipline to wake up every morning and make your bed before you do anything else in the day, right? The very first thing you've done is accomplish something. You've checked something off of your responsibility list. And there's something even in that small accomplishment that is mood elevating, right? You're feeling productive, right? Nobody that I can think of ever is productive with their life and says, well, I hate this. Now, unless you're like on the complete extreme of that spectrum, I think that's where you're approaching burnout, right?
Mhm.
In many ways, burnout is like overproduction, right? But anybody that's in a healthy range of productivity generally feels reward.
Yeah, I've heard
out of that.
You mentioned even making you mentioned making your bed, but even people like I've heard of putting their phones like as an alarm clock where they have to get up to do it. Right. It's just starting that first task and getting the ball rolling.
Yeah.
That sometimes is the most difficult thing.
That's true. Inertia. And that's why I think when you hit that realm of truly clinical diagnostic depression, right now you're on the end of the spectrum where you're like as far down as it goes, right? We all, like we said, we all experience these emotions, depressive like emotions on a spectrum. Once they've reached, such severity where you're in the diagnostic category of major depression, right? You're on the total end of the spectrum, basically. And there's a reason why when you're on that end of the spectrum, one of your diagnostic criteria is this idea of the impossible task. Maybe you have something that you have to do and it's not a complex task. Maybe it takes you 5 to 10 minutes. You cannot motivate yourself to get up off the couch and do it. It's become the impossible task. That is very indicative of clinically diagnostic depression. Now, obviously, you need many other symptoms to go along with that. That can't be your only present symptom. But chances are, if that symptom is present, it's not the only present symptom, right? And that's this idea. It's like, or it's sort of a similar vein, what we call diagnostically is anhedonia, complete loss of enjoyment in the things that you typically enjoy doing, right? And it's, that is a hallmark of depression. And in battling that, right, getting up, doing things, that helps sort of battle the anhedonia, battle the impossible task.
Well, and that was one of the things that we read about when we were talking about CTE. There was that one quarterback where he just wasn't doing the things that he loved. And like, it was very clear that this man was depressed, whether it's from the CTE or not. Like, it was definitely a contributing factor. Right.
Yeah. Bishop says, how much of a contributor is stress? Well, I actually have an answer for you based on one of the articles I read. They basically said high stress equals worse outcomes with clinical depression. So the more stressed you are, some of the examples they give are neurotic, like what they call like a stress state of mind. People who are very neurotic, people who have childhood trauma, either sexual or abusive trauma, people with these types of chronic stress-inducing either personality traits, jobs, all these types of things. Now, kind of before getting to my final point, to your next question, how is stress defined? There might be like a research clinical definition out there for the sake of like keeping things uniform between research studies, but generally, right, stress is a chronically elevated level of cortisol, if you want to boil it down to like a biological mechanism. Cortisol is a steroid that your body naturally makes, and it has a lot of beneficial effects in a very short, acute sense, right? Like you're in a stressful situation, you're hunting or being hunted or at war, right? And bullets are flying down range. You want your body to be elevating your cortisol levels. It keeps you more alert. It helps you be more engaged, right? But then that acute period should end, right? You don't hunt forever. You are not hunted forever, right? You are,
right. You can be in that stress state or elevated state, but you need to be able to come down from it.
Yeah, right. And the idea is like it's a good thing. But when things like your job, right? Monday through Friday, high stress, weekends, you never really unwind because you're always worried about Monday. Or maybe you have a job where you don't even get weekends off, which is very common in healthcare, especially residency, right? Chronic stress, chronic cortisol elevation is generally a component of stress. That's how I would biologically define stress, even though there are like less tangible emotional components to it. But anyway, stress does, people who are in these chronically stressed environments or states have worse outcomes with clinical depression. Whether it's chronic depression that just continuously relapses, whether maybe it's depression that's non-responsive to medical therapy. But in general, like when we say worse outcomes, it means people who are less likely to be treated for depression and respond positively and actually go into remission. So negative response to depression therapy is associated with chronic stress states. So hopefully that answers your question, Bishop.
That leads to a good question, I think, is can depression be cured? Like actually cured? Or are there some people where it's always going to be there? It's just how you manage it.
Well, I think the answer is probably yes to both of your scenarios. I think there are people that probably have, and basically refractory depression. That is very hard to cure. We'll bring Bishop's question back up. It's a long one. There are people who are in that like refractory depression category where meds and therapies and everything, like nothing works in the long term. There are 100% people out there. And that's why researchers are looking at things like ketamine therapy and ECT.
I don't mean to laugh at the ketamine therapy. When you said ketamine, it just reminded me like there was actually a commercial for ketamine that played when we were streaming some show. Like it probably hurt us.
Really?
In fact, like these things are coming out there more and more.
Yeah.
So very
right.
Very apropos timing last week.
They'll do ECT therapy for like medically refractory depression. Medical refractory meaning non-responsive to treatment. Typical therapy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They'll do ECT. They literally just like load the brain with an electrical pulse that kind of like, it's almost like what do they call? I'm drawing a blank. EMPs. Is that what I'm getting at?
EMP.
Like a giant electrical pulse.
Isn't that
like a nuke
shuts down
that
electronics?
Shuts down
yeah, that's
all
EMP.
electronics. EMP,
yeah.
Right? It's basically an EMP to the brain. That's basically ECT therapy. They're just basically blasting it and getting it to shut down.
Is that in order to almost have it restart?
Yeah.
Or
basically like Control Alt Delete force restart on the computer.
I'd like to give that a try. Can I opt into that for no reason and just see what happens? Is that not advised from a doctor standpoint?
I don't think so.
Okay.
You'd have to show that you've tried everything for your life altering depression and nothing is working in order to fit into that treatment category.
Okay.
But there are people out there. I mean, I witnessed it in a number of patients while I was in medical school. Yeah. Obviously, I didn't do it.
I would assume that's a fairly common thing where there's nothing working. Like, why would you not?
Yeah, I mean, it's common enough where, like where I went to medical school, there was like one, maybe two of the psychiatrists did ECT, and like usually they would have it like once a week, and basically they'd round up all the patients that needed it that week and bring them down, because they would do it like I think in the OR, like the operating room holding area, basically.
Mhm.
Because they would do, I think they do like light sedation. It's not general anesthesia. They don't have to like intubate the patients, but they kind of like give them they knock them out, like conscious sedation kind of thing. That way they can't feel it, and they basically just reboot the brain and then wake them up. And
What was the outcome of that? Like, do you know, or were you exposed to it? Was it
like, how well do patients respond to it?
yeah, like was there a noticeable difference? Like not
There
not at all. I
is
don't want to
like
generalize it.
pretty immediately there's a noticeable difference, but
But does
the
it wane? It has to
one
be like
patient I can really recall, and again, I'm not really well versed in the research on this, so
yeah.
I have like a few anecdotal experiences to draw on. The
Mhm.
one patient I can recall, I think she had it a handful of times,
Mhm.
and it kind of lasts her a couple months, maybe like every 6 months or every couple of years, even she needs to have it done again.
That's still better than nothing working at all.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
like
exactly. That's why she would continue to
yeah.
do it. I mean, I don't think in general the therapy is optimal in the sense of like, this is how we want to treat patients,
But as a
right? I
last
think we would
resort,
want to find a better way to do it, but
okay. It's interesting. I would have never thought that was even possible. To just like
yeah, I mean, I
reboot,
don't
like
know what the risk profile is of
hard
it, to be
hard
honest. I
reboot.
mean,
It feels fairly risky, but if there's no other option, it's a
yeah,
better
I
quality of
feel
life.
like there has, like, I don't know this for certain. I don't know the risk profile of the therapy at all. But I assume like there's got to be a risk for like going into cardiac arrest from
Well,
therapy.
that's like even when you have to do that on electronics, right? Like I'm always afraid when you have to like hard reset an electronic device, like it's gonna light on fire. So like the brain,
Mm,
if you're hard resetting the brain, it doesn't seem like it's a great first
probably not.
option. Yeah.
Bishop S, isn't it a super last ditch treatment for schizophrenia? I don't know the answer to that question. It might be. We can Google it real quick.
Wasn't there like back in the day, wasn't there like electroshock therapy
Can
for
ECT be used for schizophrenia?
well, and I don't know if we got to Bishop's other question, just as a
Doctors
reminder. I
also
thought that was a good one.
recommend it to help with schizophrenia, according to WebMD. So, for what it's worth, I guess the answer to your question is yes. But so there's that. I feel like there was an original question floating around out there that we never answered.
We didn't get to Bishop's other question. I don't remember if
Oh,
I
okay.
asked
Let's
another
come back to
question.
Bishop's other question. It would be super interesting to understand how exposure to prolonged stress changes chemistry of the brain, especially when it's a fight or flight situation. Hold on. Oh, that was the whole question. Okay. Um, there's definitely long-term changes. What they are off the top of my head, I don't know, but I can tell you that there are long-term changes, right? Chronic stress has a lot of long-term impacts on the body, not just the brain. But maybe we can actually, let me take a look. Do we have any, like, are we planning a show on stress? I feel like we have to have that in the works somewhere.
If not, we definitely need to.
If
But this,
not, it's a great topic to throw in the mix.
well, this question is something.
I don't have anything on the schedule, so I guess not. All right, we'll add it. We'll add it to the schedule, Bishop. We're going to talk about the effects of stress on the mind and body.
Well, and this is something I think you talked about before. Where is it external factors causing your depression, or is it internal? And can long term exposure to an external factor like actually change your brain chemistry and make it something internal? Like, what would your stance on that be?
I think the answer is yes. Probably takes a long time to really alter your biology.
Mhm.
Kind of like, stress doesn't happen from a single stressful event, unless that event is like truly traumatic. That's a different category,
Right.
right? But the effects of chronic cortisol elevation happen over a long period of time. So in order for external impacts of depression to alter brain chemistry, I think that would take a period of time. And that's just speaking from my own experience, right? This is not based on like some randomized controlled trial that I'm quoting, right? We've all had, some more than others, periods of life that just aren't going as well as other periods of our life. I've been through a particular period of my life where, yeah, I was clinically depressed. I met diagnostic criteria for depression. I was treated for it to what I would say minimal effect. It was enough effect to kind of get me out of. So one of the major components of psychiatric diagnosis is the symptoms have to be present in a way that is impairing to the quality of life of the individual, right? So usually, like, you have to be experiencing symptoms of depression enough where you can't hold a job. It's damaging your interpersonal relationships. It's inhibiting your ability to perform in school. Something to that effect. That's how we generally gauge whether or not you're within like a normal range of emotional response to a crappy situation, or you're in what we call a pathological range of emotional response. Is that, so life altering or life impairing is a key criteria to consider. And so, yeah, you can, if you have someone who their external factors are getting them to a point where it's really inhibiting their ability to function in life, right? That was kind of the situation that I was in, right? I 100% believe it was from external factors. It was things happening outside of my life, environmental. I couldn't control. There was nothing I could do about it. I was treated for clinical depression, and I think it got me kind of out of that, just barely out of that range, and allowed me to continue to do the things that I needed to do in life. Go to school, study, whatever I needed to do, right? So I was functionally capable as long as I was under treatment. But it did not treat me to the degree where like I was back to who I am. Right? That didn't happen until the external environment changed. The thing that was the root cause of why I was in the position I was in, that had to change. And once it did, everything went away. There was no need for pharmacologic treatment. There was no need for anything. I was back to who I was. Back to who I am. Right. And that's where that it's on that personal experience where I'm like, there are people that are 100% biologic. No doubt in my mind. 100% biologic, treat them. It's what they need.
The people that probably need some type of medication or something to really like just try and normalize the brain functions that are causing this.
Exactly. I think 100% there are those people.
Yeah.
Then I think there's probably the majority of people are probably more in my category of like, there are environmental factors that are influencing this, but you're bound. You can't change the environment for this reason or for that reason. And so the only thing you can do is tell someone to suck it up or treat them pharmacologically to try to get them into a space where at least their functional impairments are manageable. But if all you're doing is treating them pharmacologically and you're not engaging with them either from like a psychotherapy, a social work, or something to address the external environment or the external influence that's put them there, the root cause, I don't think you're never gonna attain curing depression as you've kind of asked.
Yeah,
that's my perspective on things.
I mean, I would have to agree with that. If you can't identify the root cause, how are you ever going to try and solve for it or make steps to make it better? And that's for Bishops. It would be interesting to listen to. I think he's talking about like the stress, but the mental health crisis. Like it's becoming more and more talked about, and hopefully this leads to people being able to identify it for themselves. I think that's where it all starts. Like being aware that something's different and you're being different than who you are, and then trying to identify it, whether it is something that is internal, and hopefully you can get some type of help for or assistance with making it better, or if it's something external, maybe you can make steps to change that. Like I said, I noticed it with me, and I made steps to do things that made me feel better, and it helped.
Mhm.
But I know that's not the case for everybody, and I don't want to pretend like, yeah, go work out, you'll feel
Yeah.
better, it'll cure how you feel. Like I think that would be reckless
Yeah.
to assume that for most people.
Everyone's situation is different. I think as physicians, we try to categorize and generalize things to the population, and
But
but
I truly
that's
believe that
not people.
yeah.
Like, people are unique. Everybody has a different story. Everyone has a different reason. Everyone has different stresses.
Well, and that's why I think just the simple awareness around this type of thing in general, it is crucial and it's helpful. And that's why, like, I've mentioned this many times. Like, the fact that we're talking about it is a step in the right direction, in my opinion. And it's part of what I'm very passionate about, and I'm happy to see moving in the right direction. Exactly.
Yeah.
The stigma. We're slowly removing that stigma.
And it's kind of, yeah, stigma is a tough one, right? How do you change stigma in a
And
society? Because
well, it's
sometimes,
so difficult when you can't see the thing. Like,
yeah,
depression is an idea. It's not something you can physically see or point to and be like, that person has it, right? Like, and that's what makes it so difficult to actually address and talk about, I think. Is because it feels like, especially when you're in that depressed state, you feel crazy. Like, we've
yeah,
talked about this stuff before. You feel crazy. You're like I'm just crazy. I need to snap out of it, and we don't want to talk about it.
yeah. And I think, on the note of stigma, right? We kind of think about stigma like societally. Oh, we need to change society's stigma. Has to do with the individual, I think, right? It doesn't matter what society thinks. It matters what the individual thinks society thinks.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, society doesn't think anything, right? Society's crazy. They don't have a brain. It's not an entity. We all have our own perception of what we think everyone else out in society thinks. It doesn't matter what they actually think. It matters what we think they think. And so it's all about the individual coming to an understanding of
Well,
how they relate to the so-called society.
yeah, and that's where it's the more stories and the more that it's talked about by specific people, hopefully someone that will resonate with somebody
Yeah.
else, and it'll remove that for them. I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. Is it's not society doing it, it's just how you're perceiving society's perceiving it.
Yeah. Like, we don't need ad campaigns. We don't need, Super Bowl commercials. We need to find a way to change the worldview of the person who's experiencing it. That's how you address stigma. You address stigma with the individuals. Welcome to the show. We're doing great. We appreciate you joining us, saying hello in the chat. Tonight's topic on the Rad and Norty show, we're talking about depression, from clinical aspects to some of the science aspects. And I think actually now would be a good time to transition into a new segment of the show that Norty has put together for us. But before we get to this new segment of the show, we'll take a brief pause and point everyone's attention to the QR code in the top corner. We are a nonprofit organization, Brain and Spine Group. We do many things: education, research, community service, and it's all focused on improving brain and spine health around the world. Our show, the Rad and Norty Show, where we talk about all topics brain and spine, specifically focuses on supporting the community service projects for veterans. So if you want to scan the QR code and join our community, either on YouTube for $4.99 a month, or you can go ahead and donate right on our website. Whichever way makes you feel most connected with us, it's all helpful. What it does is it all goes to the nonprofit organization. Neither of the two of us take any sort of salary or income for this live stream show that we do. We do it purely to dedicate our time to, one, raise awareness for the issues we talk about, and two, raise money for the veteran support programs that Brain and Spine Group does. So if you want to be a part of the Brain and Spine Group community, go ahead and sub to our channel or scan the QR code. On that note, let's get into the next segment of the show, which is something new that we're trying out. called the current events topics, right? And so obviously we're discussing depression, but what does depression look like in the real world? Well, Norty, you've gone ahead and looked at all kinds of stuff out there on the internet for us. Should we dive into some headlines that all touch on the topic of depression and just break them down?
I think we found some interesting ones, and I definitely got the one that I think would be a good starting point as topical and to address a lot of stuff we've already mentioned previously. So I don't know if you got the Ariana Grande one. I'm not a big fan, but I thought this was interesting.
Sure, let's pull up some articles here
to explore.
Give me just a moment. Ariana Grande. Let's start with Ariana Grande. All right, we got the screen share up here. Oh, let me go ahead and let's just go ahead and clean up the screen real quick. Turn that off. Okay, I think we're good here. Okay, Ariana Grande. I'll go ahead. I'll read the article. We'll get your commentary as we go. Yeah. Norty.
Ariana I don't know Grande if we necessarily have to do the whole article, but definitely
sure. I'll hit the highlights. I'll hit the highlights.
Perfect.
But this article has been trending. Ariana Grande calls out fans for body shaming her on social media. It says that they've been comparing her to the, quote, unhealthiest version of herself. So she leaves some big, long TikTok about body shaming and how, I guess I'm still kind of confused about the situation. Are her fans saying they like are they saying that she now looks like she's lost weight and looks too skinny? Or are they saying you gained weight and we missed the skinnier version of you? It's kind of unclear in this article. Do you know?
Well, listen, I couldn't tell you what she looked like before or now. I don't stay up to date on that type of stuff. Typically, when I've read articles like this before, you're always like, what are they talking about? Got to know. I'm interested in mental health. I want to know what they're being shamed for. My guess is she was always a very slender, like skinny individual, right? That's just her body type. She's also in the entertainment world. She's probably got to maintain a certain image in her head to be fit or skinny. My guess is she probably put on some weight. Happens when you get older. You know, maintaining that model-esque appearance is not healthy. And, you know, she probably admittedly here wasn't eating right. And people notice like, oh, she looks different. So they're going to comment on it. And listen, you should never comment on the way somebody looks, right? You don't know what they're going through, good, bad, or indifferent. And that would be my guess. She looks different than she did 5-10 years ago. I don't know when she was relevant.
It actually reminds me of, do you ever watch Modern Family? Have you seen that show?
I have on and off. I've never religiously watched it.
I guess like later in the show, like season 8 or 9, we've been watching through it, my wife and I, and Haley Dunphy, like she just goes like a lot of facial changes, and I guess she, you know, throughout obviously, you know, spend 10 years of your life on a show, like things are bound to crop up in your, you know, in your health. Yeah. Right.
How are you going to look the same? Like, I think that's a tough, especially when I feel like she was younger. Like, as you age, you start to look different.
Well, there's that, but then it's like when things change so drastically, like in her case, she developed an autoimmune disorder. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure like part of her appearance change was the onset of the autoimmune disorder. Then she's being treated for it acutely with steroids, because that's how you treat autoimmune disorders. Steroids have all kinds of side effects. So then I think her face just kind of filled out. She got a little bit of that moon faces, which is like typical like steroid treatment. That's like, as a physician, like doesn't surprise you at all.
Right.
And then I'm sure once she's sort of off steroids or whatever the case is, you know, her appearance generally changes again. And so there's a lot of fluctuation in her appearance. And it's like, okay, fine. Like that's expected.
But I guess like most people don't.
There was a need to like come out and like say like, oh, it's a medical condition. Like, stop body shaming me. It's like, are these people really body shaming? I don't know. I don't know what these trolls on the internet are saying, or people just commenting on it and we're getting up in arms and defensive for no reason.
The reality is probably somewhere in the middle for the majority. It's probably people commenting on it, but you're always going to have the outliers on either side. And it was probably seeing enough of that negativity. You know, your face and your changes are on display for millions of people, you know, and because of that, you're going to create more noise. So coming out and addressing it, just to be like, hey, this is what's going on. This is why you're seeing that. Like, because she's probably not comfortable with it either. She probably saw it too, right? Like, I think a lot more people are uncomfortable with their body than they let on to be. And when you put that under scrutiny, whether it's social media, whether you're in the spotlight being a celebrity, like, you're going to amplify that, and it can lead to unhealthiness.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why historically celebrities always have such problems with depression, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. I mean, these are clear trends, right? It's no secret. That's why now on Netflix, every single Disney prior Disney star, now adult actress, singer, songwriter, whoever the heck they are, has a Netflix special on their battle with psychiatric disease and how they've danced with the devil. I mean, okay, it's a little.
They always talk about the childhood stars, right? Like, I mean, especially when you're going through that being a kid.
Storyline, I'm kind of surprised it still exists. It's a little played out, but it also speaks to the truth of, like, literally, like, the life in the spotlight is destroying these people, fundamentally destroying these people. And I think that's a great segue to another article. Which, should we go to the Jennifer Garner article?
Yeah, I thought that one was interesting.
I thought this one was interesting. A little bit more positive in my perspective.
Yeah.
So obviously we have an ad here for Citibank, but we'll get to that. But the point is like, prior to the world of social media, this was kind of isolated to the celebrities, right? Undergoing this element of life that was causing such, like, psychiatric depression that led to drug and alcohol abuse. Now, I think to Bishop's prior point where he said, where is it? Here. Oh, we got to scroll way back up. Chat's popping off tonight, right? Bishop mentioned, talks about his mental health crisis in America. Well, I think, one, there's a degree of, like, with the internet and connectivity, people are more aware, right? So there's definitely a number of people where it's not, like, new psychiatric depression, but now they're talking about it more. But I think there's definitely a cohort of individuals where it's, like, just exploding numbers of psychiatric illness. And social media, I think it's just social media. I really do. I think it's this idea of, like, putting your life out there and living two different lives.
Yeah, because you want to be portrayed as your favorite influencer, right? Like, that's such a great life, but, like, that's not real.
Yeah, I mean,
that's not reality. The life, like, there's always the funny memes, just like Instagram versus reality, right? Like,
yeah,
or whatever the case may
be. That's a meme, but it's real, right?
It's real. Like
jokes, like, right? What are they? Jokes and things like memes, they're all rooted in kind of this hint of truth, and that's what makes them funny. It's almost like it's funny because we all know it's ridiculous and it's actually true.
Well, and we were pumped full of garbage for so long. Like, as there's a TV in every household, everybody's getting access to the internet. Entertainment was just lies, and we became conditioned to, like, not believe it. And then social media comes along, right? And it's like, oh, it's social media. This is now real life. It's not this lie of the media that I've been perceived, but, like, it still is, right? And realness resonates with people. Fake doesn't. Yeah. Like, we've been fed that stuff for a long time, but there's still people that buy into it because it is either a form of entertainment or it looks glamorous. We're drawn to the bright lights of Hollywood. But again, Hollywood's not real life.
Like, as a society, it's like we're just, like, begging for more and more, but on the other hand, it's destroying all of us. It's like we're literally begging for the thing that's destroying us. It's like the whole AI thing right now, right? What do you see in the news? Advancement of AI is happening too fast. It's going to be the downfall of mankind. Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should be doing it.
Right.
But, like, what does everyone want? Load up ChatGPT, write my assignments for me.
It's fun.
Well, I'm not going to stop using it because everyone else is using it.
Yep.
Right? And next thing we know, we've got AI bots that can compute emotions and determine that mankind is worthless and they want to rise up and kill all of us. I mean, I think some of these AI engines, right, have been, like, starting to come up with these things like that on their own.
An AI generated a banger song by Drake and The Weeknd that's not real. Like, if AI can make
Really?
banger music straight fire, like, what else do we need humanity for? Give me the robots, slide them up. But that happened. That's real. It isolated their vocals. It made a song from scratch, I believe, using their voices, and people
I think
loved it.
Carlos brings up another
Crazy.
great point too about, this is like life online, right? And all of a sudden your life can be commented on by people you've never met, people you've never seen. And like, frankly, it's hard to be in a position where you're like, you don't care what these random people think.
Well, and plus, here's the other thing too: is like, if you can not care what people think, that's great. But at some point, you're gonna see a negative comment if you're checking comments, and it's gonna sink in.
Yeah.
And you can't tell what's on the other side of that comment. It could be a troll. It could be somebody who is going through something on their own. And they're looking to lash out at somebody. It's not real.
Yeah.
Like, there's always that response too when people deal with these people and call them out. It's like, I was going through something, and they're looking for a place to put all this negativity. And what's the best way to do it? Anonymously online, because then it can't come back and get you.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, you got to filter through that noise somehow. And there's so much of it out there that it's not a good thing when it's negative.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's exactly the point of, what this article is getting at. I think you put very well. To exist in a world of social media, you have to learn to filter out the noise. And how hard is that to do even as adults with fully developed brains? And how much harder and developmentally impactful that must be on an adolescent. And that's why, this article is all about Jennifer Garner, and obviously who's a celebrity in the spotlight, but raising her kids basically with no access to social media, allegedly, right? And, while her kids, I guess, have given some sort of pushback on it, at the end of the day, even her oldest is ultimately reportedly grateful for her putting her foot down. And I think there's a good reason to feel that way as a parent. I think even being in somebody's situation, like, being a celebrity, is probably even harder to feel a little hypocritical, right? Telling your kids, like, you can't even be on social media. Meanwhile, mom's like on talk shows and
face is
TV
plastered all over Apple TV right now. She's promoting stuff. She's on talk shows.
Does those what did she do? Commercials for like JetBlue or something like that for a while?
One of them. I mean, we're looking at commercials. Rashida Jones for Citibank. So I mean, Jennifer Garner's been in commercials too.
She did there was a banking commercial I think she did for a while. I don't remember which bank.
What's in your wallet? Was it that one? I feel like that was a Capital One. What's in your wallet? I need to stop watching Neutrogena.
So. Neutrogena. Let's see. Yeah. Carlos says Capital One. Sherry says Neutrogena. Let's see.
Maybe both. I can't keep it straight. I remember Samuel L. Jackson did Capital One. I feel like I'm still leaning towards Capital One. That's my bet. Sherry, I'm sorry. But I think Capital One was involved as well. I believe you with the Neutrogena. But
Jennifer Garner turns 50 today.
I feel
this
old.
Is April of last year. Jennifer Garner's 51 years old. The two products that keep her skin looking the absolute best.
Sherry says both. See?
Yeah.
Yes. I knew there was at least a Capital One.
Douglas Mike, the Navy SEAL. All right, let's look it up.
Let's look it up. Real-time events from the chat. This is how it should be. We're talking about events,
Douglas
and chat's giving us stuff to
Mike
look up.
Day. Former senior chief petty officer Douglas Mike Day has died. Day was shot 27 times during a 2007 deployment to Iraq and was awarded the Silver Star. Check out Douglas Mike Day, the Navy SEAL. What are we getting at here?
What happened with him?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out where Bishop is going with this guy.
His obituary, I'm guessing he may have killed himself.
He was shot 27 times. I don't think he killed himself. I think
He was 27 times?
27 times.
Oh, see, he killed himself. So he lived through the 27 times.
Wait, was shot 27 times during a 2007 deployment to Iraq and was awarded. I assumed that he died from that. Apparently not.
Dang, see?
In a message to the Navy, hold on, let's pull up the screen share. In a message to Navy Times, a Naval Special Warfare spokeswoman reported as saying, "We mourn the loss of an outstanding Naval Special Warfare teammate, former Senior Chief Mike Day. His courage and grit form the standard we uphold in the community today, and we will always remember his service to the Special Operations community." March 27th, 2023. That was very recently. His career, 21 years, Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 with Valor, Purple Heart. Okay. He became a well-known author and advocate for wounded veterans. He continued to train special operations forces, law enforcement personnel as tactical training instructor. In addition, Day was the founder of Warrior Tribe, a nonprofit organization offering resilience training resources to veterans and trauma survivors. 2020 penned his memoir, Perfectly Wounded, where he recounts being the first man to enter a 12 by 12 room during the hunt for high-level Al-Qaeda operative. 4 terrorists were waiting in that room, ready to ambush the first person through the door. That happened to be Day. An intense gunfight ensued, and when the smoke cleared, the 4 terrorists were dead. Their deaths were at a high cost. Day had been shot an incredible 27 times and had sustained multiple shrapnel wounds with a traumatic brain injury. Amazingly, despite his injuries, he managed to clear the rest of the structure and rescued the 6 women and children inside before walking away under his own power to await medevac helicopter, where he began to fight for his life. He was evacuated first to Baghdad, then to Landstuhl, Germany, and finally to Walter Reed Medical Center. Okay, that all makes sense.
It says he details still struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay.
What else? And this is a quote. His memoir also details his journey with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury due to his military service. Over my life, I've had a lot of trauma and have acquired the mindset that I don't care what happens. He told Coffee or Die. When it happens, I'll just figure it out.
And then as of March 27th, he killed himself.
Yeah, this one came out after he died, I believe.
Well,
and that one, I mean, that seems like somebody who was struggling deeply and maybe didn't find a way through it. Maybe they didn't, have any treatment to treat the depression like they needed.
I don't know. Here's the other thing that kind of reminded me today in reading a little bit about research on depression. While depression is the major significant majority of suicide, it is not the only thing that leads to suicide. So to say someone killed himself, well, he must have been depressed, is not necessarily a direct one-for-one conclusion. So I don't know. I'll be honest, reading about all the stuff this guy was doing, it's hard to believe a guy like that was like truly depressed. I don't know. I almost wonder if it is more like but I almost wonder if it was more TBI related.
But that's what,
like almost like CTE kind of.
And that's where it's, and that's a good point. It does feel almost like it's a CTE related, which causes some sort of depression because it's there. Yeah. And that's the quarterback we read about, where after he had CTE, like he became almost depressed and a different human being, right? So I don't want to just
I don't know.
say
I
like
mean,
CTE.
I think there's also something Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah,
Go
good.
ahead. Say what you
I
just.
was gonna say I don't want to say like CTE causes depression, but it clearly causes changes in the brain
Yeah,
that can mimic depression.
yeah. I think something that doesn't get talked about enough with suicide is the idea of feeling trapped. Um, and I'll come back to this in a moment. I just want to get to some of the comments that are coming in. Julia says the best I've heard suicide described is lost their fight to depression the same way you'd say someone lost their fight to cancer. Interesting perspective.
And I think Bishop is definitely very current and very relevant to what we're talking about, right? Like we are talking about depression, but other things can mimic that. How do you differentiate, right?
Yeah.
And
I
how do you find solutions to either one? And how do you be more aware of it?
so I'm just going to kind of pontificate on something for a minute. And I don't know if this will lead anywhere productive, but these are just sort of the thoughts rolling around in my head. Is that I think when we're talking about suicide specifically, and I think there is an element of this with veterans that probably is not well understood. When we because we kind of assume a one-to-one relationship with suicide and depression. And I think there's actually probably an underappreciated number of individuals who kill themselves out of a lost frame of reference that is not necessarily depression. And what do I mean by a lost frame of reference? Well, you lose sight of the mission, right? And I'll kind of use this terminology mission because we're kind of talking about military suicide in this primarily. Although I think it can definitely bleed outside of the veteran population. But I if I had to venture a guess, I think this postulate, this thing that I'm postulating applies mostly to the high rates of suicide in veterans. Because if they were all just depressed, we'd be just throwing depression meds at them and following up with them, putting them in psychotherapy and fixing them, right? The reason I think is there's possibly a lot of suicide that's happening outside of clinical depression. And it's when you get into a mindset where you feel trapped. And it almost becomes not an emotional, but a logical conclusion that your only way out of the trap is to kill yourself. And it's not like, oh, I'm so sad. I hate myself. I'm so worthless. I am depressed. Is it becomes, well, especially probably for veterans whose life became one so centered around a military identity, military camaraderie, and mission accomplishment. And then you put them in a world where those things suddenly don't really exist. And there's a lot of monotony in the civilian world. There's a lot of lack of goal orientation and goal-oriented activity. And when you wake up every day and you're like, wait a second, I don't have a mission. My job is to exist. It's almost like in some ways, a borderless. You're in a borderless environment. You feel, but that borderless environment almost then feels like a contained environment. You're contained by by the fact that there's nothing, and you're sort of like, well, then you start thinking like, what's my purpose?
Well,
And then you realize there's no purpose. And then you get into this mindset of like, well, I'm stuck. I don't know how to gain purpose again. And if I can't gain purpose like I used to have it, then there's no point in being here. My only way out of this purposelessness is, and you create this equation in your brain. It's not emotional. And I can say this because I felt it at times in my life. It becomes an equation where you're just simply like, okay, 2 + 2 = suicide. Like, I don't want to. I want to live, right? But I can't create an equation in my life that equates to something that makes sense to me. So the only thing I can think of is to just cross the whole equation out.
Well,
And that leads to a very dark place very quickly. But it's not necessarily depression that leads you there.
and I agree with you. And what Bishop put here as well is it is that lack of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel that I think can lead to suicide. And when you don't seem to have a purpose and you're just simply existing, and I think this leads into one of the videos you'd shared with me that I found super interesting, is when you're lacking a purpose and you don't understand why it is you're even doing why you're even doing what you're doing or what the point is, and you don't see any chance of it getting better and it only going down. Like, I think that's where what you mentioned, they lose sight of it. They lose sight of an outcome or purpose. I think that I would classify that as depression. Maybe it's not get a little echo. Maybe it's not the normal outlook of depression. I would classify that as depression.
Is that echo gone now? I think it's probably the screen share causing the echo.
Yeah, it's good now. But I would
still say I didn't hear the echo. I think it may have just been on your end.
Yeah, it just throws me off a little bit. But I would classify that as depression. When you're lacking purpose and you don't have any value in life, right? Like, I would classify that as a form of depression. Is it one that's, you know, a chemical thing, or I think it's more external factors? And I feel like there need to be better ways to treat that too, and it needs to be looked at. And you don't have to label it depression, but I would consider it that personally.
I can agree with you on like a philosophical basis.
Mm-hmm.
I think the reason why that argument wouldn't necessarily hold up in a clinical diagnosis of depression is because you're not necessarily getting that like life impairing, like functional impairing aspect, right? For all intents and purposes, these people are very functional.
Yeah. Until they're
show up at work.
Until they're not anymore, right?
Until
they're not anymore because they killed themselves.
Well, yes, but then at that point, I mean, but the point is, like,
I get what you're saying.
Until that person kills themselves, they're like not clinically diagnosable with depression.
Right. Well, and that's what I get. Like, you know, I get where you're coming from, where you can't say that's clinical depression, but they're clearly going through some type of depression, and we need to find another name for it because they're not talking about it. And that's
exactly. I mean, unless that's exactly it. They're not talking about it. So unless the person straight up comes out and tells you, I go to work, I do everything, none of it makes sense to me, and I think the only option I have out is to kill myself.
Yep.
If they don't tell you that, you have nothing clinically diagnostic to go on.
Right. Well, then that's why I think like people sharing their stories, talking about it, getting the awareness out there, hopefully that resonates with more people and it gets them to talk about it so we can try and find solutions that don't end with them killing themselves. And so I agree.
Yeah. On that note,
we're saying the same.
Go ahead and watch this short video.
I thought this was powerful. I
enjoyed watching this. Yeah. I think while not all encompassing and applicable to every single person in every single situation, I personally think there's a lot that resonates, maybe with different people for different reasons. Let's take a look.
Men, they don't so much need love, they want respect. If they had to choose between love and respect from their mate, they would choose respect. Women need love. They want to be loved and adored and everything else. Men, different.
So I had a psychotherapist called Adam Lane Smith on my podcast, and he said that male depression gets treated like female depression. Men are made to feel loved and accepted when all they want to do is feel capable and powerful. He used this example of the Blitz in World War II. Before the war started, there were these psychiatric wards, and they had patients. And these patients had been totally comatose, unresponsive. Then the Blitz starts. So there were fires and there were injuries all over London, and there were ambulances and fire engines, and there was no one to drive them. These men got up and started driving fire engines and ambulances. These men that had been unresponsive for years and years and years. Give a man a purpose and the ability to achieve it, and he will crawl over broken glass with a smile.
Men, they don't so much.
So, initial thoughts before we wrap up for the night.
Well, that's where I think that fits into what we were talking about. If somebody has if somebody has a purpose, like that will help. And I think my biggest takeaway from this, and I've shared my experience, I don't want to come off like I'm on a soapbox, right? Is pay attention to how you're feeling, what's causing it, what you can do differently to get your body and your mind into a healthy place, I think is the starting point for mental health. Like more people need to be aware of what they're feeling, how they're feeling, what's affecting it. And I'm hoping the more we talk about it, the more it gets exposure as a society, as people. Like that's my takeaway around this, because I don't want to see people end up on the wrong side of depression.
And so I think that's spot on. My closing thoughts, kind of curtailing off of what you're saying, are what this to me is saying is things of the mind very often boil down, at least for many people, 50% of the population, if you sort of categorize it more for, being something that resonates with males, is the need for purpose, right? That's why men typically go through these midlife crises, right? Why is it that we don't talk about women going through midlife crises? Why? Does that mean that it doesn't happen? Absolutely not. It does. These are statistical trends. They're not absolute truths. But in general, men very often are associated with going through some sort of midlife crisis, right? Because men very often ask themselves, what is my purpose? Why am I here? Because a purposeless man very often feels like a lost man. And that very often associates with things like depression. And that's why when we're talking about mental health, brain health, I think it is impossible to not eventually end up in discussions of, what's the right word? I guess I'll say spiritual health, right?
Well, I think
And
mind, body, and spirit all intertwine together, and you've got to get them all healthy as possible to create a healthy ecosystem for yourself.
And obviously we've done, I think when on our episode we did with Jim Brooks talking about demonic possession, that's almost looking at what happens when you go like take that to a dangerous end of the spectrum. But I think there's a reason that no matter how much science and mankind tries to separate themselves from God, it will always find its way back into society, because there is an innate craving of the spirit of mankind to answer that, to have some sort of like, why am I here? Why are any of us here? And it impacts us. Like nobody just functions as this like bag of biological materials. We just don't.
I agree.
We don't have great explanations as to why.
And listen, if you don't subscribe to the religion, like I that's like that spiritualness, like I do think it's there, like, yeah.
Bishop says, bro, cougars. If that's not a midlife crisis, I don't know what is. All right, fair enough.
Yep.
Although, have you seen Cougar Town? One of my favorite shows. Although not nearly as good as Scrubs. But in a post-Scrubs world, in the wake of Bill Lawrence's masterpiece of Scrubs, Cougar Town sufficed for a great show. On that note, I want to thank you all for joining us for another week of the Rad and Norty Show. It's been a blast. Chat was popping off. We always love to see it. Thanks
Great
everyone
discussion.
for joining us. Yeah, this was a good one. Next week, we're going to keep in a similar line of discussion, but we're going to shift the focus more to anxiety. And I think that's where we're going to get into I think we're going to evolve a lot of the ideas and discussion we had this week. So I kind of think about next week as a continuation.
I think so.
Of this week. So don't miss next week. Same time, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be talking about anxiety. If you want to stay connected with us as a community, don't forget to scan the QR code or head over to our YouTube channel at Brain Spine Group. Sub to the channel to support our nonprofit work. And we'll see you next week, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Rad and Norty, we're out.